Steam curled from the carcass in gentle ribbons, the remnants of a warm soul leaving a cold body, dancing upon the autumn wind to the applause of aspens alight. What was left of the elk hung from a chain in the barn. Levi used to think the land after a kill. Now he just checked the wind, the tag, and the time. Dust crawled down the ridge as he sank into his old wooden rocker, blood-stained hands twisting the top off a beer. Condensation ran down his fingers and dripped pink onto the cabin porch, about a stone's throw away from the old barn beneath the hill. He allowed himself to fall into the rhythm of things, the chair knocking, then creaking, then settling. He took a deep pull from the bottle every fifth rock or so, appreciating the weight in his legs that came from a hard-earned day, and a shot that did more than just wound. The high country breathed around him. A drift of cold air came off the creek, tinged with spruce, a resin-laced bite as the sun lit the crowns of the Quakies. Somewhere on the far ridge, a bull bugled. He closed his eyes and deciphered it. Anger, with equal parts lust and arrogance. Other voices answered, challenges echoing through the throat of the mountain. He opened his eyes, watching as the sun bathed his home in orange. From the porch, he could just make out the barn, the square door, the silhouette of chain and gambrel, the elk on the hook that meant the Houston man's deposit would clear, meat boxed and dry ice ordered by morning. He took another draw, sweat and hops lingering on the back of his tongue. Once upon a time, he'd have poured a little beer into the dirt for the animal. Once upon a time, he'd have run his hands down the coarse hide and said thank you out loud, where the mountain could hear. He didn't do that anymore. Coyotes started up on cue, yips and howls stitched across the dark as the last light sank behind the horizon. Levi set the empty bottle on the rail and cracked another. The old ache in his forearm hummed, nerve fire that never quite died. He rubbed at the ropey scar running from the heel of his palm to his elbow, clenching and unclenching his fist as the tissue flexed beneath his touch. The scars itched in the heat of the day and soothed only in the cool of the night. He watched the rippling muscles make the old tattoos dance. Faded anchors, a trident, roosters and pigs, sailor's luck from a life at sea that still woke him mad with salt in the mouth. He forced his eyes back to the ridge and told himself he'd earned this quiet. The bugles stopped, like someone shutting a door, snapping him from the haze of bitter nostalgia. He sat up, listening for any lingering trace of the territorial cries. The leaves stilled, the breeze settled, and the only sound was the creak of the old rocker. A blanket of silence fell over the valley as if dropped from the sky. He laughed once, reconciling with the quiet. "Huh, weird," he said to the empty yard. He drank, swallowed the last of the bottle, and reached for another, feeling for the pack of cigarettes that he kept in his breast pocket. "The only thing worse than drinking is drinking alone," he laughed to himself as he lit the crumpled paper. Coors, meet Marlboro. Levi sighed as smoke unfurled from his lungs, the relief short but welcome. The nothingness pressed in from all sides. He shook his head as the ringing in his ears swelled into a deafening roar. He hummed to himself as he finished the beer, then two more, banishing the droning in his thoughts along with it. The shake came back in his hands, the way it always did when the stillness got deep, the tremor that started in the scar and worked its way up. He set the bottle down and wrapped his right hand around his left forearm until the muscles stopped spasming. The chain in the barn clinked once, then twice, as if a draft had found it. He stared into the darkness where the barn should be. The sun had finally set, giving way to the inky depth of night. He turned to the bugle leaning by the door, its reed dark with spit and pine dust. "Hell with it," he said, standing and towing the empties into a little glass herd. He spat the finished cigarette into the dirt and raised the mouthpiece to his lips, trying a soft call. It came out like shit, a child blowing into a kazoo. He laughed, nearly spilling over, then winced and tried again. This time, he pushed air from his belly and rolled the note up into something passable. His tongue ached where the reed had bitten, blood and salt crusting on his lips. Nothing. He hung his head in disappointment. Then another bugle answered back from the dark. Not an echo. Perfect in pitch. Perfect in climb. A mature bull's full column of air rattling against the night. It was close. Too close. And the note didn't break against the timber the way it should. It hung there. Empty. Levi chuckled anyway, relief crowding out the hush. "Bold bastard," he said. "Working nights." He pulled a second call from his pocket and gave a cow mew, thinking about the herd he'd seen yesterday, moving off the burn scar to the south. A satellite bull shadowing the cows while the herd bull pushed his brothers downhill. Could be one of those little guys circling back. Could be an easy morning for a man whose client had more money than patience. The porch light flickered, then died. "Son of a bitch," Levi groaned. In the dark, he could just barely make out the faint glow in the barn. White light flickering beneath the door, casting restless shadows through the gap. "Must have left it on," he sighed. He pushed the thought from his mind and raised the bugle, sending a challenge back into the night, hoping his little story of a cow and a young bull would infuriate the lurker in the timber. The answer came back immediately, a piercing cry repeating his challenge note for note. He pulled the map from his pocket, marked a small X on the slope, then stuffed it away. He sat and drank some more. The chair swam with him, and his eyes grew heavy. The last thing he heard was the breeze, the chain in the barn creaking, and groaning as the door swung an inch or two wider on its own. He woke in a near panic, mouth dry, the sound of drumming hooves pounding against his throbbing head. He checked his watch. The green display read 2:08 a.m. "What in God's green earth?" he muttered, pushing to his feet and catching himself on the porch railing. The horses were spooked, running in frantic circles, throwing their heads, kicking up dust. Levi grabbed the flashlight from his pack and hobbled off the porch, feeling for the old revolver at his hip, thumbing its cylinder and finding comfort in the click. He raised the flashlight, smacking it against his palm until the yellow beam sputtered to life. Weak, but steady. "Easy," he said as he crossed the yard. "What's wrong, girls?" The nearest mare rolled an eye at him, huge and moonlit, her neck slick with sweat, steam lifting from her back in the cold. In the dim glow, he saw the corral gate drawn tight. Something small slipped between his boots and vanished under the rails, fur brushing his ankle. He flinched, raised the gun, then lowered it as a little fox streaked into the aspens with hay stuck to its tail. Jesus! He pressed the cold flashlight to his temple until the throb eased. He ran a hand along the mare's jaw, feeling her tremble slow beneath his palm. But she never stopped watching the barn. The wind had stilled. No rattle of leaves, no burbling creak. From the far side of the corral, the oldest mare screamed and reared, slamming against the rail. The gate yanked free and swung open. All the horses bolted through the gap, shouldering and snorting. Levi leapt aside and hit the dirt as they poured past, hooves striking sparks off stones, manes ghosting in the white moonlight. They arrowed between porch and barn, breaking for the slope as if something were following them. "Hey!" he shouted, voices small against the night. "Hey!" By the time he found the flashlight and got to his feet, the last tail had vanished into the black timber. He stood there, breathing hard, hands open, the sound of his own breath the only thing left in the yard. He looked around, hoping to spot at least one horse still close, but there was nothing. He sighed, then froze. The barn light was off now. The door stood 6 inches from the jamb, swaying on its hinges, moving just a breath either way. He swallowed, raised the gun over the light, and walked. Maybe he was just dreaming. Maybe the alcohol had gotten the best of him. Maybe it was another one of his episodes. No, it couldn't be. Sweat dripped down his forehead and stung his eye. He blinked it away and crossed the yard. He peered inside. The smell hit first. Wet iron and cooling fat. Hay doused with urine. The flashlight cast a thin beam across the hay bales, the empty stalls, the beams thick with dust. The chain clinked quietly. He slipped through, careful not to make noise, and put his back to the door. The light found the hook in the space where the elk had hung. Nothing, just a black puddle crusting at the edges, sawdust clinging in curled flakes. The hair on his arms lifted, a chill running down his neck. Footprints and blood led away from the center. He turned in a tight circle, scanning his surroundings, then knelt to inspect them. 5 toes, side by side, long and thin, with something smaller off to the side where the ankle should have been. A dew claw? His stomach turned, bile rising at the back of his throat. What the fuck? He followed the footprints with the light. Then they went vertical, walking up the far wall like ground had become optional. At the top, the pattern broke. Handprints, fingers too long and palms smeared, trailed along the rafters. A heavy skittering came from above, like a bear crawling through the ceiling. He swung the light and the beam caught on a pale shape clinging to the timber, hairless, raw around the joints, ribs gleaming beneath skin like wax. It turned its head toward the light. The eyes flashed back at him, twin moons in the dark. Then it opened its mouth and bugled. He felt it in his jaw hinges, in the bones around his ears, in the scar tissue running down his wrist. He dropped the gun and clapped hands over his ears, but there was nowhere to put the pain. Something hot trickled down his neck, liquid from eardrums torn thin by the sound. The flashlight fell and swung in mad circles across the floor, painting frantic shapes on the walls. In that strobe, he saw the pale thing drop from the rafters into the far stall. It didn't look at him. It pushed one of those long hands into a pile of hay and dragged something out. The elk. Had it stashed it there, waiting for him? The cavity where the guts had been gaped wide, a black void. The creature pushed its head inside, clawing and bending to fit somewhere it had no business fitting, groveling and choking as it forced itself deeper into too tight skin. It slid its body beneath flesh that should have split, and for a moment the hide climbed with it. The seams of hair, flesh, and sinew pressing smooth with sickening cracks and pops. The elk twitched, its forelegs flexed with a violent jerk. The rack shred a strip of velvet that hung like a wet ribbon before slapping the floor. The elk. No, something within the elk stood. Its first steps were infantile and awful, legs too stiff, the rack dragging. It shuddered, rising taller and taller, bones creaking. It turned with a seizing gait, and the eyes in its head were wrong. Too bright, too knowing. It shouldered the doors open. Moonlight flooded the barn, silvering everything until Levi wanted to close his eyes. The elk lifted its head and bugled, full and rich and close, like the mountain itself had put its mouth to his ear. He crawled backwards on his elbows into an empty stall and watched it pass. He tried to pray, merely the idea of words he no longer remembered. Fingers curled around the edge of the barn door. Levi held his breath, wishing he could bury himself in the hay and vanish. A face peered around the corner and stared back at him. Then another and another. They were like the ones inside the elk, but smaller. Curious eyes studied him intently, one tilting its head like a dog as if waiting for him to speak. Steam left their mouths in the moon wash, and he could hear the soft click of small teeth as they breathed. "I'm sorry," he said out loud, because there was no point to pretending he didn't mean it. "I'm done. I won't take another, not an elk, not anything, I swear." The nearest creature blinked slowly, its eyelids closing like shutters. It stepped inside, rising tall before circling down onto all fours. It stopped above him, lowering its head as if deciding which part of him to smell first. The breath that hit his cheek was warm, soft. The barn went quiet. A white SUV eased up the rutted drive and died in the yard. 3 men got out, stretched, and checked their phones, making sour faces when the bars didn't climb. One of them pointed at the hand-painted sign nailed to the house. Elk Ridge Outfitters. "This must be the place." Another cupped his hands and called, "Hello, Levi." "He was supposed to meet us at the fucking airport," one of them snorted. "Calm down, fellas. Let's go see if we can round him up. He's probably busy is all." The porch was a mess. The chair overturned, green bottles scattered in a cluster, an empty bugle lying where it had fallen. The men knocked, tried the handle, locked. They looked around, searching for any signs of life. The air felt heavy, like a held breath. "Maybe he's at the barn," the tallest man said, nodding towards the partially open door. They crossed the yard in their bright jackets and new boots that still creaked. Stepping into the barn, one of them waved a hand in front of his nose and recoiled. "Jesus! It smells like shit in here. I can't see a damn thing," another replied. "Levi, you in here?" One of the men pulled the barn door wide, flooding the inside with warm morning light. Something hung in the center from a creaking chain, turning gently from side to side, casting a long shadow. For a moment, it could have been a deer hung for skinning by a man who didn't know what he was doing. The rack scraped the floor, leaving pink smears. One of them gagged and stumbled back outside. The other 2 stood frozen. The thing on the hook was smaller than an elk. 4 blunt hooves where hands and feet should have been, a contorted face, almost snout-shaped, and beneath the thin, glistening skin, ink ran dark. An anchor, a rooster, a pig. The chain squealed as the weight turned and turned, and the eyes refused to close. From the ridge above the barn, a single, perfect bugle rolled down.